There is a photograph from the summer of 1979 that does not exist, and its absence tells you everything. 4 men should be standing in a studio in the south of France, recording the album that will become The Wall. Look closely at the sessions, at the credits, at the testimonies, and you will find only 3 partners and 1 employee. The employee is Richard Wright. He founded the band. He named its harmonic language, and by the time The Wall reached the shops, he had been fired from Pink Floyd by telephone. Nobody noticed. That is the part that should disturb you. When Roger Waters left in 1985, the world treated it as the death of Pink Floyd. Lawyers were summoned, interviews were given. Fans chose sides like children in a divorce. But when Wright was pushed out 6 years earlier, there was no funeral, no headline, no war. The most consequential personnel change in the history of the band happened in silence. And the silence was the point. You do not hear the keel of a ship. You only notice it when the ship starts to capsize. To understand what was lost, you have to understand what Wright actually did. Because for 50 years, the public has been getting it wrong. He was not the quiet one. He was not the shy craftsman politely filling space between 2 geniuses. He was the harmonic author of the Pink Floyd sound. Strip any classic Floyd track down to its skeleton, and what remains under the concepts and under the guitar is a way of suspending chords so that they never quite resolve. A sense that the music is hovering over an abyss without falling into it. That suspension is Wright. The jazz voicing smuggled into rock, the church organ patience, the refusal to land. Gilmour himself said it plainly years later. The magic of the Floyd sound was the combination of his guitar over Rick's keyboards, not beside, over. Wright was the surface the others stood on. And he was something else, something harder to put in a credit line. He was the buffer. Pink Floyd after Syd Barrett was a collision system. Waters, all concept and will and accelerating bitterness, against Gilmour, all instinct and sound and stubborn beauty. 2 forces like that do not coexist naturally. They coexist because something absorbs the impact. For a decade, the absorbing material was Richard Wright, the man with no appetite for power, no flag to plant, the one who cared about how the chord felt rather than who got the last word. Dark Side of the Moon, the most perfectly balanced record the band ever made, is unimaginable without him. And not only as a peacemaker, Us and Them was his music before it was anyone's lyric. Written years earlier for a film by Antonioni and rejected. The Great Gig in the Sky is his architecture filled by another voice. Time breathes on his keyboards before the words tell you what the breathing means. The last album on which Pink Floyd sounds like a single organism is also the last album on which Wright's authorship is everywhere. That is not a coincidence. That is the thesis of this entire channel. So what happened in 1979? The official story is small and procedural, which is how the worst stories usually dress. The band was broke. Their financial advisors had evaporated their money. And The Wall was not just an album. It was a rescue operation with a deadline. Waters was writing like a man possessed, which he was. And the sessions moved to France for tax exile reasons, which tells you how desperate the arithmetic had become. In that pressure chamber, Wright was drifting. His marriage was ending. He was exhausted, depressed by his own later account, and creatively paralyzed in a band where the space for his kind of contribution had been shrinking for 2 albums. Waters saw a man not pulling his weight. And Waters, holding the only finished material and therefore all the leverage, made the call. Either Wright leaves the band when the album is done, or the album does not come out at all. No album, no rescue. Bankruptcy for everyone. Think about the cruelty of the geometry. It was not a vote. The other two did not agree so much as fail to resist. Gilmore and Mason have both spoken since, with the particular discomfort of men describing the day they watched something wrong happen and stayed seated. Wright, the man whose whole function had been to absorb other people's collisions, had no buffer of his own. He accepted. He finished the sessions quietly. And then he did the most quietly devastating thing in the history of the band. He agreed to perform The Wall live as a salaried musician. The keyboard player of Pink Floyd, on stage behind the wall he had helped imagine, playing his own parts for a wage. A session man in the band he co-founded in 1965. And now the irony. The one that history keeps in a locked drawer because it is almost too perfect. The Wall shows were so expensive to stage that they lost money. The three remaining partners, the owners, the men who had kept the company and expelled the employee, absorbed the losses personally. The hired hand on a fixed salary was immune. Richard Wright was the only member of Pink Floyd who made money from the Wall tour. The man they fired to save the business was the only one the business paid. If you wrote that as fiction, an editor would cut it for being too neat. Reality kept it. Then comes the final cut, and the proof becomes audible. It is the only Pink Floyd studio album with no Richard Wright on it at all. And you can hear the absence the way you hear a room with the furniture removed. The record is intelligent, wounded, lyrically ferocious, and harmonically flat. The chords go where chords go. Nothing hovers. Nothing suspends. The abyss is in the words now, and only in the words, because the man who could put it underneath the music is gone. Waters had finally achieved total control, and what total control sounds like is one mind with no resistance, no friction, no second gravity. The final cut is not a bad album. It is a solo album wearing the body of a dead band. The death had already happened. It happened on the telephone in 1979. This is why the popular chronology of Pink Floyd is wrong. And the wrongness matters. The world says the band died in 1985, when Waters declared it a spent force and went to court over the name. But by then there was no balance left to destroy. The court case was a fight over the estate, and estates belonged to the already deceased. The actual death was the removal of the keel. A band is not a brand and not a logo. It is a specific chemistry of specific people. And the Floyd chemistry was a three-way suspension. Concept, instinct, and the harmonic ground that let them argue without falling. Remove the ground, and the argument becomes a war. And wars end with somebody leaving. Waters walking out was not the catastrophe. It was the aftershock of a catastrophe that the public had failed to register 6 years before. There is a coda, and it is the gentlest revenge in rock history. When Gilmore rebuilt Pink Floyd without Waters, the first person he reached back for was Wright. First as a guest, then fully. Until on the division bell, the old harmonic language flickers visibly back to life. And the band's final studio statement, decades later, The Endless River, is built almost entirely from Wright's unused recordings and dedicated to his memory. Gilmore has said that nobody ever replaced Rick, that nothing they did after him sounded right without going back to him. The man fired for contributing too little became, in the end, the only member whose contribution the band literally could not continue without. They buried the soul in 1979 and spent the next 35 years digging it back up. Richard Wright died in 2008, and at his death, the tributes finally said out loud what the credits had mumbled for decades. But listen to what survives. Put on Us and Them tonight. Listen to the way the chords refuse to land, the way the song holds you over the drop without ever letting you fall. That refusal is a man's signature. They fired him for it. So here is the question this channel keeps returning to, because it will not resolve. Which is fitting for a man whose chords never did. If the soul of a band can be dismissed by telephone, absorbed into a salary line, written out of the credits and out of the story, and the world simply does not notice, then what exactly was the world listening to all along?